Hello everybody, Katie here from Salvaged by K. Scott. Today I'm bringing you along as I refinish this antique washstand that's a little bit of a family heirloom for my husband. This piece has definitely had a good, well-loved life as a utilitarian piece of furniture. It used to be the nightstand between the bunk beds in the kids' room at my husband's family cottage, but his Nana replaced it with something new about 10 years ago, and Doug just couldn't quite let this go. Since then, it's been kicking around our house without much of a purpose, but it's finally time to shine it up. It would have originally had a backsplash, or more likely a harp with a towel rod on this back lip, but that is long gone and I'm not going to worry about replacing it. But I am going to be stripping all of this mess back to bare wood so that I can restain it. I can honestly say that I've never really paid much attention to this thing, and I kind of always assumed it was maple, but now that I'm looking at it up close, I can see that it's actually elm. Elm trees used to be very common and were used in a ton of furniture, but after a fungal infection spread by beetles knocked out most of the tree population, it's actually pretty hard to come by these days. This stand was probably made sometime at the beginning of the 20th century, but this isn't its original finish. It's already been made over by a GDR in 1985, and if you look closely at the drawer, you can also see these ghost marks from the original Victorian-style hardware. This French provincial stuff does not belong on here. I'm going to pull these off, and I've already ordered some more period-appropriate replica pieces to replace them with. Doug's only request for this is that I leave all of the marks on the inside of the drawer. It's where all the kids' art supplies used to live at the cottage, so I won't be touching that at all. I started trying to get the screws out of these hinges, but they're teeny tiny slotted screws and they're stuck in there pretty well. So instead of getting frustrated with them right now and probably stripping them, I'm just going to move on and I'll revisit that later. Because I'm very well aware of just how much wax and furniture polish this thing has seen, I'm going to wash it down with some simple green degreaser and really hot water before I start removing the finish, so I don't end up grinding that stuff down into the wood. Once the wood was dry, I was ready to start working away at the old finish. I hooked up my Orbital sander to the shop vac and then sorted through my mess of sanding discs to find an 80 grit, a 120 grit, and a 180 grit. I put on my respirator to catch any dust that the vacuum doesn't get and started with the 80 grit to clean up the drawer. Next, I moved over to the cabinet top. This is a truly rustic piece of furniture that's got a lot of wear and tear, especially on the top here, and I don't necessarily want to get rid of all of that history. It's definitely still going to have some beauty marks, and even a lot of original milling marks are on here, but I do want to give it the smoothest finish that I can. There's not too much I can do about the cigarette burn on the front edge without creating a big divot in the wood, so that's going to stay as it is, and there are a few other pretty good gouges, but for the most part, the wood cleaned up really nicely. Once I had the finish and stain removed, I switched out to my 120 grit and just started smoothing out the wood again. Then it was just a matter of working my way around the whole washstand using the 80 and 120 grit abrasives, and I also busted out my carbide scraper to help me cut through any thicker spots of the poly finish even faster wherever I could fit it. I did as much as I could with my 5-inch Orbital sander just because it cuts through the finish super fast. But on the insides of these shaker style panels, I switched out to my smaller 3x4 rectangular sander. This job of getting into corners could be done quite nicely with a triangle mouse sander as well, if that's what you've got. At this point, I couldn't really avoid the doors any longer. I needed to get them off so I could finish sanding them properly and also clean up the inside of the frame. So I grabbed a smaller flathead screwdriver and my hammer. Sometimes when screws are being a bit stubborn, you can get a bit better of a grip on them if you tap the screwdriver into the head of the screw a little bit, and then use all of the pressure that you can muster to press it in while you're turning the screw. After about half an hour of struggling, I did manage to successfully remove 2 of the 12 screws, and then I had to tap in my toolmaker husband for help. Doug! I need your help with these screws, please. He unscrewed a few more and then ended up having to drill out 2 of the screws that just wouldn't budge. But we did eventually get the doors off of the cabinet and the hinges off of the doors. Then I could move on. I finished sanding the doors and then used my detail sander to get whatever else I could before moving on to hand sanding the smallest stuff with the help of this little foam gripper and even a paintbrush handle. Once everything had been sanded with the medium 120, I moved up to the finest grit that I wanted to use on this piece, which was my 180 for the finish sand. And I did all of that by hand. Mechanical sanders, no matter how good they are, will usually leave behind those little curly Q swirl marks in the wood. Not pressing down on the sander can reduce them a lot, but to make sure that I don't get any of them in my final finish, I've learned to do my last sand by hand. I vacuumed up a bunch of the dust that I'd made and then wiped everything down with a microfiber cloth and some mineral spirits to pick up the rest. And while that dried, I pulled out the stain colors that I had on hand and did some little test swatches on the back of the stand to see what they looked like on here. Before I stained, I applied a coat of pre-stain wood conditioner to help the penetrating wood stain go on a little more evenly. And once that had dried for about 30 minutes, I rubbed on a coat of Minwax's Special Walnut. I like to rub it into the wood first, and then when I go back to wipe up the excess, I always follow the direction of the grain. As that was drying, I didn't really love the kind of green undertone that it was giving the wood. It was close to what we wanted, but not quite right. So I let the Special Walnut dry for a few hours and then applied a second coat using their English Chestnut color, which has a little bit more of a red tint in it. I decided to seal the table up with some wipe-on polyurethane. It's really forgiving and easy to use and leaves a beautiful soft sheen on the wood. I used a dark t-shirt rag to apply this so I didn't accidentally end up with any white fluffies in my top coat, and I wiped on 3 coats and gave each one just a really light smooth out with some 600 grit in between. The last thing I needed to do was reattach the doors and install the new hardware, but I was not interested in messing around with those flathead screws again, so I popped out to the hardware store and picked up some little Robertson ones instead. These new poles that I found online are more appropriate to the age of the piece, and I really like the rustic cast metal look that they have. The poles did come with screws though to attach them, and since I've already got holes in here, I rifled through my box of bits and bobs to find some machine screws and nuts that I could use to install them with instead. I was even lucky enough to find 4 of them the same and in a pretty similar color to the cup poles too. Here's one more look at the washstand that I started with, and this is what it looks like all spruced up. Well, not all the way spruced up. It's still got a ton of its antique charm with some good dents in the top and that cigarette burn, of course. It's still filled with childhood memories of giggling cousins jumping from bunk to bunk with their flashlights long after bedtime, but now it's ready to take on yet another generation full of stories. Make sure you're subscribed for tons more furniture makeovers. Leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts on this one, and I will catch you all next time.